I'm Conrad Humphreys, and as a professional sailor I've tackled some pretty horrendous seas, but now I'm exploring quieter waters. I've sailed and raced all over the world, but there's really no place like home. I'll be travelling along the south coast of Devon in my beautiful lugger, Bounty's End. This is a very, very heavy boat to row on your own. For centuries, people and goods have sailed these waterways. They were trading routes, fishing waters, and sometimes even battlegrounds.
Boats have sailed up this river for many hundreds of years. I think that adds a certain something.
The sorts of vessels that were coming up were actually capable of carrying 300 tons of copper.
The stuff in the 60s is the stuff that's first to collapse.
I'm going to explore the history of these rivers and discover why they're such a fantastic place to sail. So come on board for my river journeys. We're right at the entrance of the Dart. We've got this northeasterly wind, which I'm hoping we're just going to be able to lay the headland. Tremendous swell pushing us rolling in from the east here. Today I'm heading up the Dart, probably one of the UK's most loved rivers, certainly for sailors. With the tide helping us along, I'm going to try and sail Bounty to the upper reaches of the River Dart, past Dartmouth and the Britannia Royal Naval College. It's then on to Ditcham, Sharpham House, and finally, as long as we don't get stuck on a mudflat, we'll reach the historic town of Totnes. What a magnificent entrance. There's not a huge amount of breeze, and what breeze we have is just from the northeast. Incredibly special to see the historic town of Dartmouth ahead of us. I'm really looking forward to sailing her through these narrows now. Okay, so we're just coming up to Dartmouth Castle here on the port side, on the left-hand side, and it is just magnificent. I think when you enter any river, it's pretty special, but to see something as imposing as this, looking down on a tiny little boat, I think it would put the fear of God into any French or Spanish boat trying to raid our shores. We're sat here sort of almost trapped because we've lost the wind. I can imagine some archers sitting in that turret up there having a jolly good pop at us. Just looking at these high cliffs for a sailboat, very, very difficult to get in here because as soon as you're in the entrance, the wind just completely shuts down. And of course, that would have been a natural defence for anyone coming in here. For those that came in here a couple of hundred years ago, certainly, audacious in terms of its approach. But of course, once you get in through the safety of the harbour entrance, the harbour opens up and you feel very secure. The actual swell is already starting to calm down a bit. We've got a little zephyr of wind that's just helping us through, but we're fighting a little bit of current here. Dartmouth's well-documented history goes back to the Celts and the Saxons, but people were probably using this harbour long before that.
It's a beautiful, deep water, natural, sheltered harbour, and its position relative to the Atlantic has been its reason for its growth and its prosperity. One of the earliest records we have of it in 1147 is when 200 ships from all over Northern Europe and England and Scotland mustered here for the Second Crusade, precisely for that reason. It was a sheltered place where they could all meet together. It was relatively easy to get supplies, probably down the river from Totnes and also from around Dartmouth and Kingswear itself, before they headed off to the Mediterranean. And because of that experience, it looks as if it became the muster point for ships going to the Crusades. So again, in 1189 and 1190 and 1217, there are records of large numbers of ships meeting here.
It's got a natural sort of protection, hasn't it? And that's played a significant role.
So the origin of the castle lies in the 100 Years' War. So the 100 Years' War of England against France is the reason why the castle's there, because over a very extended period you're looking at sort of extensive kind of raiding between the two countries across the Channel, and so all established harbours need some form of protection. The first record that we have of the earliest castle being built out on that point is in 1388. And that's the first fortress, but the castle we can see today dates from about 1481. It's the oldest purpose-built coastal artillery fort in Britain.
So the water we're on here probably started its life thousands and thousands of years ago, probably from some boggy little creek up on Dartmoor, about 60 miles away, and it formed these incredible valleys that we're coming into. Alongside all the pleasure boats, there's a military presence in Dartmouth. This is where the Royal Navy trains its officer cadets. Britannia Royal Naval College sits on a hill overlooking the town.
The Navy first came to Dartmouth back in 1863, and it was the river that was part of the attraction. Needed somewhere obviously near the sea with a deep natural harbour, but at the same time not too busy a commercial port, because obviously you're talking about baby naval officers who are not the best seamen perhaps straight away. So HMS Britannia came here initially, followed a year later by another wooden hulk called the Hindustan, and they provided naval training for nearly 40 years. And it wasn't until beginning of the 20th century that it was decided that the old wooden sailing ships were clearly a bit yesterday, and so building a larger modern college ashore where we are now. So it was opened in 1905, built in fairly quick order. Work had started on it in 1898, so just 7 years to build something of this scale is quite impressive. The architect commissioned was Sir Aston Webb, most famous for a few years later redesigning the frontage of Buckingham Palace and the Mall. So clearly indicating that the Admiralty thought they needed a top man for the job, because it's quite clear that it was designed not just as a bigger modern replacement for the two wooden hulks on the river. It was also going to project a particular image, so it's supposed to embody British sea power when really it was at its height, but at the same time being threatened like it hadn't been for the best part of a century. So very important that it was seen to be, you approach it and you're sort of awestruck, and yes, this is a confident maritime nation investing in their future. Oh yeah, we better go home and not threaten Britain if we possibly can.
One of the most famous cadets was Prince Philip, who came to the college in 1939.
Philip was fairly unique actually among his classmates, in as much as he was one of those that did have sailing experience. He'd been a very successful sailor up at Gordonston, which meant he was able to, together with one of the divisional officers, lead the rest of his class down on the river, although that didn't stop him falling in at least once. But which he managed to cover up by clambering back on board before anybody noticed, although I'm sure they must have noticed he was looking a bit soggy. And in the end, he came out as top cadet. He actually got the King's Dirk at the end of his time at the college. But it was actually back in the summer, back in July 1939, that he had his biggest moment, which was when the royal family visited, and he was given the duty of looking after the two princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret, whilst the King and Queen went off and did their official duties. So clearly it would have a major impact on his future life and career, although when asked what his standout moment of that visit was, it wasn't meeting his future wife, it was actually being invited on board the royal yacht Victoria and Albert, which was out in the River Dart.
So we've left Dartmouth and we're just coming up to Ditcham. The river narrows here and there's quite a lot of mud flats and little rocky areas, so we've really got to keep our eyes out here. There's a lovely sort of following breeze just blowing us up the river. The tides are still quite neapish, but as they're going to build as we get round the corner, we will get some nice tidal push all the way up through Ditcham up towards Totnes. Ditcham's a pretty special place. It's thought that the Saxons first settled here in the 7th century. You can find it in the Domesday Book. Back then it was known as Dadisham, which means homestead of deeds. Just over the river from Ditcham is Greenway House, where Agatha Christie once lived. Long before though, it was the home of Sir Humphrey Gilbert and his half-brother, Sir Walter Raleigh, both of whom learned to sail here and then embarked on journeys that would impact the world. So they would have learned some incredible skills on this river, which would have, certainly helped them in their seafaring voyages. Just navigating around these little tidal flats, the mud flats, getting control of their boats, learning how to manoeuvre them in these small confined spaces, would have just given them the skills that they needed to embark on their bigger voyages. Never an easy manoeuvre on your own. The wind's just funneling up here. We've got the current underneath us. It's driving us up towards Totnes. It's just fantastic sailing in rivers like this. Oh, look at Maisie. A little family of seals there, 5 seals on the pontoon. You just almost wonder how on earth they haul themselves out like that. They're probably thinking we're struggling along like this. Right. Yeah, they're probably sat there watching us thinking, what's that crazy guy sailing that boat on his own? Why doesn't he just moor up alongside here and have a cup of tea, chill out? Just quickly get this sail up on the other side. It's got to be so nimble on your feet here because every time it's changing. This is going to be a really short little jibe on this section, but we just need to make the most of it. Because we're at low water, you can see the little rocks and the mud flats sticking up. So you get this sort of slight jitters as you're coming down here. Sometimes speeds of 5 or 6 knots. It's quite a good wind here, and you just want to make sure you don't get this wrong. The other real challenge is you're not entirely sure, I'm not entirely sure, which side of these mud flats we're on. And so at any stage you think we might run aground.
Anyone sailing goods up and down this river a couple of 100 years ago would have taken it very slowly to make sure they didn't get stuck.
So for the 18th century traders coming up here, they really had to have their wits about them because one minute you've got good sailing conditions, the next minute the wind's backed. They've got to keep all the options open. They've had the oars ready so they can quickly get on the oars, maybe even some horses on the towpath to just pull them around some of these bends, but it's certainly not easy.
In the past, some quite big ships have been capable of being taken up the river. The nature of the channel means that you need skilled pilots. Big timber barges were going up the river to Totnes, relatively shallow draft, really quite late.
So we're just being completely becalmed here. I'm just trying to work out what to do next because the wind seems to be sort of, a little patch here, a little patch there, but we're really at the mercy of the currents as we're just drifting up stream here. But it's almost quite nice just to take a moment. You can hear the cows mooing in the hills, and it's so calm up here, so peaceful. It's typical, isn't it? Now the wind's coming from ahead of us, and the boat's being skewed around. I'm just wondering whether we're going to have to get the oars out. This is really what makes river sailing so difficult. We've got a little gust of wind coming in here now, and we might be able to just catch that, just get past this tricky bit. It's now really important just to sort of pick up these little gusts of wind. You sort of spot them on the water. Hopefully there's enough wind to just push us round the corner. Try and get this up before we end up in those woods, in those trees. So close. I just think, how on earth did they do this under sail? Very, very difficult. I think I'm just going to hold this corner of the sail. It's just so difficult to keep switching the sails from side to side. But we've just got to slowly get round this corner. Just really close to the mud flat here, but you just see round the corner the Sharpham House coming into view. It's one of the most famous houses on the River Dart.
The house was built in the late 18th century for a Royal Navy captain, and it's got an incredible view down the river. Sharpham is also known for its vineyard that lines the bank of the River Dart.
This part of the river has got this almost like a full S bend, And of course it takes lots of manoeuvres with the sails to get round corners like this. It is just the most beautiful spot. It's so unspoilt up here. You've got these incredible deep valleys and wooded trees. It probably hasn't changed a great amount over the last couple of centuries. It's still a navigational challenge even now. We're just a little bit becalmed here, but you can see up behind us is the ferry, bringing all those people up to Totnes. That's what an engine and all that power can do. We're just stuck here. I think if you can learn to sail on rivers with all the different wind directions and tides and so on, you can probably sail anywhere. It's got a few kayakers coming up here.
Just coming into view is Totnes. We're now 11 miles inland.
Baltic Wharf is still a thriving boatyard. Some really high-tech industries down here as well. And so the town still has its real claim to this sort of maritime tradition. Well, getting up here to Totnes hasn't been that easy, but when you think back to those 18th century traders, it certainly wouldn't have been easy for them either. But the rewards are huge. You know, you're here in a thriving market town. The access to South Devon, you know, is a great opportunity.
Huge amounts of Devon wool went out. Indeed, the growth of the Devon wool industry is probably one of the reasons why Dartmouth grew. The Totnes merchants were very much part of that wool industry. Tin is another important commodity at an earlier stage. So you're looking at, you know, two of Devon's key exports, wool and tin.
So we're sat here and it's all quite calm and tranquil. People are going about their business and you know, enjoying this environment. But if we think back to the 18th century, you know, the buildings here still show the hallmarks of a very industrious area. You know, back then, these quaysides would have had hundreds of little working boats and ships servicing, you know, what was quite a thriving fleet of boats coming up from Dartmouth.
The tide has turned. It's time to head back to Dartmouth.
Boats have sailed up this river for many hundreds of years. I think that adds a certain something to anybody who's sailing or walking or whatever it might be.
Here we are, fantastic bit of breeze here. Sailing in this harbour is just exceptional, absolutely exceptional. You get these high cliffs, gusty conditions, all of these beautiful coloured houses. It really is an incredible place to sail. I feel completely alive sailing here. It's just a real haven of activity. It really is fantastic.
Next, I'm taking Bounty to the Salcombe estuary, a boating haven with a history of international trade.
So one thing that is just fantastic about Salcombe Harbour is that there is so much going on. It's just something to behold when you see just the sheer volume of boats